Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Winning Momentum podcast with your host, that's me, Scott Sinclair, a special guest today, Olga Jilani. Welcome to the show, Olga.
Thanks, Scott.
Now, first of all, we are shooting from the beautiful National Club in downtown Toronto. And Olga, you may not know this, maybe you remember, but when we first tried to do this show, the predecessor show, Martinis with Scott, we tried to do it live from this very room with Ashley here, who's off camera. And the concept was that Ashley would make me drinks and then I just talk into a microphone. And we tried it, episode 0. I think you can still see that on the YouTube channel. And Olga, the relevance of this is that you're almost a co-founder of this podcast.
Almost,
of the Martinis with Scott podcast.
Maybe I'm just the inspiration.
Yeah, that could be. So thank you for joining us. As I said, we're coming to you from Toronto today in the beautiful National Club. Olga is co-founder, advisor, director, CFO, former CFO of Switch Health in Toronto. And you did that in aggregate for about 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Somewhere in that
2
range?
years, yeah.
Okay. And that is a high growth entrepreneurial venture for you that we're going to talk about today. Now, as I understand it, we have some significant disclosure restrictions, which is completely cool. So we're not, if I ever ask you something that's off base, just shut me down on that. We don't need to talk about specifics anyways. What we want to talk about is your crazy ride and the success that you've had and the fact that you're now just rich and famous and retired and all
Just
those
retired.
And before Switch Health, Olga was with, she was vice president at Sinclair Range, which some of you may know is my company, and with the predecessor firm, Range Corporate Advisors, for an aggregate of roughly 7 years, 7.5 years. You were.
I did remember sending you a text. This is our 7-year anniversary, and then no one texted back. So
is that well?
It was more than 7.
Welcome to the firm.
Thanks.
And
I got a read notification, just nothing else. Yep.
Okay. And Olga, she ran the place, and then she left to do her entrepreneurial venture, which means I had to go back to work, and which is, we've met with some, we got by.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, thank you.
I was useful for sending flowers to people afterwards and in remote locations, but that was pretty much my use post SRI.
So, as I said, Olga was with Sinclair Range, and in that capacity, started as a senior associate and grew up to really second in charge and ran the whole place. And I think in the course of that became probably one of the best true turnaround women in the country.
Thanks.
Can I say that? I'm not trying to count in the definition of turnaround the accountants and lawyers that do insolvency related stuff, which I view to be different. But in terms of a true turnaround expert, I think you were right up there.
Thanks.
I can't come up with another name.
Thank you.
To compare against you. And you've dealt with some of the crazy clients and situations we have. I think one of your first deals, I was sending you on a train from Toronto to Ottawa to deal with a certain Robin.
Yeah, that's correct. That was my first engagement.
Who was all things wrong with entrepreneurs? If you had to write a list.
Yeah. And you know what? I think one thing I want to touch on, like as you go through my resume, the Switch Health learnings, if anything, highlighted what you and I worked on and what you talk about on the show so much, is that it's all absolutely true. And it sounds like it's easy to distill, but you distill it because you have that much experience in the work that you do, which is turnaround in special situations. Like the lessons on here, they sound, fairly easy, and I like your little shorts as well.
Yep.
But like those are actual practical applications. It's not textbook. Right. This business makes widgets. La la la. Like, why don't we talk about real businesses? And that's exactly what you provide.
It's distilled better than it used to be, I think, and
like the martinis.
Yeah. And I don't think it's because of the experience. I think it's because of this show. I think the act of doing this show has forced me to reflect and document and revise and just think about how I go about things.
Yeah.
Which I've never had to do before.
Which is interesting because at one point, I think maybe 3 years ago, I took 4 years ago, I took a course in meditation.
Okay.
And I very clearly came out, we had like lunch or something, and I came out and I told you about it, and I walked you through it. You know, it's just like sitting down, being quiet, being an observer in your life, as opposed to an active participant for about 10 minutes. I think you like rolled your eyes and you were like, oh man, I need way more than 10 minutes every day, which is fair because there was so much going on at that time, and probably even more now. But effectively, this is your meditation. Like that's what this show has become.
Yeah, it's
become a spectator as opposed to like an active participant. Like nothing gets done.
It forces you to be self-reflective.
Yeah,
for sure. Otherwise, you have nothing to talk about.
Yeah,
and I think that makes you a better person and a better professional and a business. Because you know what, I can call bullshit on myself too, which I've done many times.
Yeah.
Hey, this is what I believe. Then why don't you do it, asshole?
Valid. But the other thing is, I think that's actually what's like the first thing, we talk about Robin. Are we allowed to we're not smacked? Okay, cool. It's
him. Just him.
Just kosher, just him. So the one thing about Robin is that there was and people like him because he's not the only one that we've encountered. Yeah. And it's not even that they're malicious or there's ill intent. It's just that they do almost no self-reflection. They're so certain that they were right and it didn't come out the way that they expected because of some other external circumstance, like
victim.
in the victim mentality, but also in victim mentality is more of an umbrella term, right? Whereas you can say, how many times have you heard somebody blame the industry dynamics for a business's failure? And we've done that I remember the air compressor company, remember that we almost took over? And all the air compressors, it was out in like Oshawa. The lady had really long fingernails.
Yes,
and I had a real good job. Okay.
Yeah.
So they blamed industry dynamics, whereas all their other competitors were like killing it.
Yeah.
And like best year ever, best 2 years ever, best 5 years ever. And they were like, well, the industry's just bad. And it's like, no, you're just not doing things right. And there are 10 other guys who are and who are making a living and keeping their, AR current and AP current.
So I blame all of that more and more so on confirmation bias. Do you know what confirmation bias is?
I do.
We can walk it through for the audience. Again, I know this is the 1,000th time that I've talked, or at least the 207th time
because it's the foundation of so many mistakes.
Right, and so the idea is that the human brain does not seek out facts and then make a decision based on those facts. It does exactly the opposite. And if you think about it, that's the way the brain would have to work because there's just so much data in the world. How could you not work that way? So what it does is it makes a decision and then it seeks out facts to support that decision. And it rationalizes facts that are against that decision, which is the whole victim mentality. That's like, I thought it was going to be like this, but it wasn't. But that's okay because of that external circumstance, right? Or in extreme examples, you have information blindness entirely. Like you don't even see facts that are contrary to what you think. And the way that your brain makes sure that that's true, that you don't see those facts, is it creates this agitated state called cognitive dissonance. And nobody wants to be in that position. So I've more and more concluded, as I've thought long and hard about that and had podcasts and discussions with people, is that if your confirmation bias is that I'm a reasonably competent human being, manager, I've had some success in my career before, and now it's all gone bad, it can't be me, because I just told you I'm reasonable and I've done everything I could do. Therefore, it's not me. Therefore, it's something else.
Yep.
Right? And that's my theory on that. We had a lot of that going on with that particular company.
But what company has that not gone on with in your experience? And which one did you come into?
I think, it goes on with every company, including my company, including the most successful companies, because that is the human condition. That's how we think and that's how we operate. And so you can't fight that. You can't say, I don't do that. Well, that's not true. That's just how we all operate. And so the question is not whether you do it or not. The question is, how can you mitigate the problems that might arise from that? And I try to talk about having quantitative key success factors.
Yep.
Right? Those 3 or 4, as you would know, 3 to 5 assumptions that drive your model, that drive your projections, that drive everything economically in your business to know those off the top of your head, to monitor them regularly. And if they start going in the wrong direction, you need to change.
And one important point on that is that it can't be revenue, right? I think when we talked about KPIs, if I look back at that show, and this was like 3 years ago, it cannot be revenue, because that is just both up and down. That it can't be a success or a colossal failure if you don't hit the can't sway.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So before Sinclair Range, you came out of Dundee Securities as an analyst in the mining investment banking business, which you did for roughly 3 years. And that was a combination of, I'm going to guess, research, analyst work, investment. I don't mean issuing research reports, but
thank God. You know how investment bankers feel when they're compared to research analysts. Yeah.
I was trying to catch those words before they came out. Doing M&A deals and working in precious and base metals. Which if you're in the Canadian market and you didn't grow up doing mining stuff, well, you weren't really in the market, right?
No, not at that time. That's when gold hit. At the time, it was the all-time high, and you learned all about flow through. And Dundee was really the shop to learn mining. It was started by Ned Goodman, God rest his soul, but he really was kind of a driving force behind that. And a lot of really successful CEOs in the mining space came out of there. And private boutique banks kind of branched out. But I think you have in there talk about the experience as a young grad with the hours and culture.
Don't read my notes.
Okay, we'll make
I
the
can
font
move
smaller.
My computer.
Okay,
then how
well,
would
I'll
I
move back and upstage you. So one thing is that I think struck me very early on. So I was 22. And one thing that really came out of it quickly was that you need to abandon this notion of work-life balance. I think we talked about it. So I went to Schulich, we talked about a business school, they give you all these strategies, blah, blah, blah. None of it works. And in fact, trying to strike that balance is exactly what puts more pressure on it. We had 3 women in that firm, which was a huge deal. I think in all of mining, there was 5 in Canada, and 3 of them were in my office, including myself. Okay. So we had guys break up with girlfriends, put relationships on pause. Managing directors had very understanding spouses, that things would work always took precedent over whatever personal home life you had. I remember at one point I started taking friends out for dinner that I wanted to maintain a relationship with, and a lot of the time just be me showing up, paying the bill and heading right back out. And it's true, and I got very lucky that I had a really understanding group of friends.
Yeah. Well, if you were paying the check.
Well, yeah, I mean they understood a lot more at that point. But I think my greatest advice for young grads, and someone gave it to me. His name's Lindsay Weiss. He actually is managing director at Origin now, at Origin Partners. But he's just put your head down and just keep working at it. You just kind of have to put your life on pause for the next however many years you're doing this. You're either going to do it well, learn a ton. If you're in mining as a woman, jewelry has absolutely no value for you because you know how the sausage is made, and it's not that fun and sexy anymore. Yep. Especially when you know what the margins are. It's terrible. But that's just, you get out what you put in, which is generally the case for most things. And that's exactly what my advice is for a young grad who can handle it, is to come out there, find a job where it might be 20 hours a day, which it very often was, but that's a productive 20 hours where you're not, at a boutique shop, it's a little different than a big bank. We were constantly doing something different, and we got a lot more responsibility as analysts than I think some associates did at the bigger banks, just because of the pool of younger talent, that just the hours to be able to learn about. And when you say what do investment bankers do? Frankly, anything to get a deal done. And you have to supply CEOs with information, write press releases, whatever else. That's what we did.
That's right. That's right. And I wonder whether somebody 22 today knows any of that. On respects, because we've just come off 2 years of a global pandemic. We've turned into a Zoom culture here in downtown New York or downtown Toronto, and people are going to the office. And if you're at home, you're not putting in those hours.
I think that they might have. I don't know how it worked this time around for the last 2 years for that cohort, but I expect that there was actually more pressure because. There was still, the market dipped today, but there was still more pressure to get deals done even in a pandemic. There was still deal flow. And in fact, when there's no deal flow and there's a pause, you use that time to just maintain your client base, right? So the pressure is actually greater to not lose your client in this kind of dormant, quiet space where you can't take it for dinner or whatever else, right? You got to keep that relationship alive and that dialogue going.
Well, we're going to come back to this topic when we talk about the thread in your journey between investment banking to turnarounds to being an entrepreneur, because one of those threads has to be to the commitment to the role, the absence of balance, and what that means for everything. So I want to come back to that. You may know I did I think it was a short. I think it was literally all the damage I did was in 60 seconds on quiet quitting. I got a lot of comments.
All of them positive, I'm sure.
No, not well, 3 maybe, but the rest of them no. So for today's discussion, again, we're not going to get into the specifics of Switch. What I want to talk about is generally some of your experiences, and very interested in the journey from being a banker to becoming an entrepreneur, the lessons you've learned, and just generally dealing with organizations that are in chaos and needing to encourage the chaos a little bit, but then to bring some order to that, which is the process of creating value, I would think. And you and I have talked about that a lot in the past because, from the perspective of Sinclair Range, the company that I run, and we jump in and we try to advise troubled businesses. But for a long time, forever, half of the revenue that I made was from advising high growth companies, not from advising troubled companies. And
because they could afford to write the check.
Well, not necessarily.
Well,
but it's the same work.
It is.
It's the same work. That's the point. Is that if you have a company that used to do 100 million in revenue, pick any number, 100 million, a billion, 10 million, 1 million, whatever, but 100 million in revenue and it dropped to 40 million in revenue, now it's very troubled. And then it goes back to 80, that's high growth.
Yep.
That 40 to 80 is a high growth. It's the same chaos, it's the same structural issues as if you were a newco and growing to great success. And so literally so that from Sinclair Range's perspective, it's the exact same engagement letter, like literally the exact same engagement letter. And so you're the perfect, I don't know very many people that went from turnarounds to high growth entrepreneurship. And so you're in an ideal space to talk about that, I think.
It's very interesting because we've always commingled them, and I don't think people believe you as much when you say it, but it's absolutely true. It's the same. It's the notion of lack of structure, because every company will go through different stages of existence, some very quickly, some slower, where the framework and the approach needs to change. And the answer isn't just hiring more consultants. It's about bringing in talent who's familiar with that stage of the company. Yeah. You've been around for a little bit longer than I have, but you've been in every one of those stages that you come in and you.
I almost hit the drum roll button there. When
yeah,
you did that.
Thanks. Yeah. You should next time. There's a drum roll button.
There's I can laugh, applaud,
nice.
But only I'll hear it in my headphones because you don't have headphones.
We'll get ready for the applaud button.
Okay.
But that's exactly it, right? It's the notion of a company going through stages, and some high growth companies go through difficulties anyway. Like look at one that's in the public eye. Like Elon Musk has confessed on a number of occasions that the most high growth moment for Tesla was the one he was most worried about, because he wasn't sure if he had enough cash to make certain commitments, and beyond that, if his lenders would cooperate with some of his strategies, like if he still had the strategic backing of the investor.
Yeah, rapid change is rapid change, and here I will give you the applause line for that. There you go. It was good, believe me. I know you couldn't hear it. Okay. So,
trust.
One of the premises for this show, as you will recall from way back when, is that in the U.S., for example, there are 6 million new businesses started every year. An astonishing number, which is up double roughly from, say, 5 to 7 years ago. So there's a whole trend of people moving out of the corporate world into becoming an entrepreneur. Yet, Yet 90% of those businesses will never, ever, ever pay their founder a living wage, ever. And 98% of those businesses will never create any wealth.
Yep.
You might get a paycheck, but they're not going to create any wealth, any intergenerational wealth, transferable wealth. Just doesn't happen. So 2% do. And
those stats are accurate because I've heard you say them over and over, and you have them tattooed on your clavicle because they're just the fundamental truth. Yeah.
I'm not sure what a clavicle is, but I don't think you would know that.
Okay.
You personally beat those odds. Mm-hmm. You beat those odds. What attracted you, knowing those stats, what attracted you to being an entrepreneur and, moving out of being in a relatively safe position as a banker?
So I want to address the stats. I think a lot of those 6 million new businesses are probably gyms, restaurants.
For sure.
What are the other ones that regularly go out of business? Roofing companies and trucking companies. Those four are apparently the top four that go out of business the fastest. Really? And yet people still stampede towards them without understanding those stats. So like those are so... there's so much external pressure and there's so little control from the actual entrepreneur to be able to control success. So I want to be mindful of that. In university, my final paper, my final thesis was called "More Money, More Problems: A Critical Analysis of the Microfinance Initiatives." I can't remember the exact word, but it was "More Money, More Problems." Okay. But the idea of microfinance is
I feel like you took that from a rap song.
I did.
Yeah. Knowing you.
Yeah. My urban background. There's this notion that the notion behind microfinance, and there's a reason you don't hear it. Like Muhammad Yunus won a Nobel Peace Prize for it. It was a big deal. I graduated in 2010. And between 2008 and 2012, it was like it was the best thing since sliced bread. It was going to eliminate poverty. It was going to be great. And then it just kind of went away. Like you don't hear about microfinance anymore.
It's true. You don't.
You don't. And definitely not in the same capacity. You heard about it before. So the notion of microfinance was that there was all these entrepreneurs in developing countries, and if you commingled their lending, you would give them all a little bit of cash. I didn't understand how the interest rate works, and I still don't. But they would be different than shark loans, and then everybody's repayment would depend on everyone else, which just feels predatory, frankly. Like knowing what I know about, like if you talk about debt, you're in my house now. Like I've learned a lot from you. Yeah. So. It didn't make any sense to me. And the number one issue with that is that not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. Like, there's no shame in being an employee.
Number two, right?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in, not saying, I own my own business or I'm the CEO. Like, it's a lot. And it's frankly, I go back to, it will dominate your life if you do it right. I think that... likelihood is that I have fantastic co-founders, but we all had a certain amount of training in whatever our specialization was within the company.
Right.
Like we all came with a certain background that we probably had better odds than someone who has a passion for food and opens a restaurant. Right? Like you kind of have to adjust those stats for who even had a shot at making their business a success. If you are if you're someone who worked in the restaurant industry for a long time in a certain capacity and you are just passionate about food, like that's not really enough. Passion's not enough. And I really like Scott Galloway. Do you know who Scott Galloway is?
I know the name, but...
He's a lecturer at NYU about marketing, and one of the things he actually drives home around passion is like, forget passion. Passion is what you do on weekends. Find something that you're good at, that comes fairly easy to you, and just exploit it. Right. Maybe you're passionate as a restaurant, a chef, and you love cooking for your friends. That doesn't mean you should open up your own restaurant, no matter how many times your mom says that to you. Like you kind of so when I say that, like how many entrepreneurs open a business with a track record of having worked in a business in a capacity where you see a big picture, that 6 million number probably comes right back down, and probably the success numbers, yeah.
Except even those people gave up a job. Mm-hmm. That could have fed their family to go on this adventure.
Yeah, but
that was probably ill-advised, as you just said, but they still did it, right? It's still, and more importantly, it's just a rare circumstance to be a success.
Wildly, yeah.
As an entrepreneur. I mean, that's really the point of the stats.
Yep.
Right? From my perspective. You're so dead on right about the passion. The other thing about passion is you're passionate at the things that you're good at.
Yeah, and I think
you could start off as being passionate about a restaurant, but I promise you 9 months in, a lot of that passion's going to be gone.
Yeah, it's a painful experience. I think that get ready for something that you have sufficient discipline in, where you're not going to like every day. And as an entrepreneur, you're oddly probably not going to like most days. I think I had a realistic expectation of what running a business was. Like, I love Roofers World. I think they have a great product. I like all the people there. And every day I would have to kind of like give myself a pep talk of like, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. Like, you know, like the job is hard. Like, I think you have a great team and that you support each other. And that's kind of where the loveliness of the company comes from. But the work itself is actually very difficult here.
Did you underestimate that?
With Switch?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely harder without, you know, having someone to constantly go to and say, I have this problem, how do I fix it? Can you fix it for me? As, you know, happened a lot. Or tell me how to do it. But at the same, like, we had a really fantastic advisory board. The board of directors was always very available and active. But at the same time, it just came down to tenacity. Like, and even in my work thereon, like, we very quickly made the decision to be the solutions department. So what attracted me is that I'm capable of being the solutions department. I found a group of other people who are very much in that same mindset. Like, everyone, you can be another complainer, but when you decide that you're going to be the solutions department, you're going to take problems, your customers' problems, your employees' problems, and you're going to deal with them head on, that's really what makes you stand out. I mean, think of how many restaurant owners read a bad Yelp review and it just ruins their day. Like, there's no tenacity. Forget passion, be tenacious.
I like that. Good advice. And how was the taking on principal risk when you came out of a relatively risk-adverse environment? Not that you wanted risk-adverse, but that was just not at Sinclair Range necessarily, but at the larger bank. I mean, I guess investment banking, now that I'm talking about it, I mean, that's high risk in the sense that you got like a 3-year career, then you're done.
Well, no, you can be an associate. So, like, you probably have a 5-year career before you're expected to become a salesperson. Like, let's be honest. Like, VP, and they're open about it. Like, you need to have certain EQ and sell deals. But what's interesting about Dundee, so I started July 5th, and they laid off, like, I want to say like 50% of the workforce in December.
Wow.
Yeah. So when it comes to like job security, it wasn't there. I think it was always very realistic. Like, that for me was a wake up call, right? I turned 23 that January. I remember coming back from vacation in December, and the work that was split between 3 analysts and like 2 associates was now to 2 analysts, and my co-analyst got the flu, like had the audacity to get the flu. So I was like 1 analyst for a week supporting 2 VPs, like 7 managing directors. It was wild. And we started having deal flow like right out the gate in 2011. But to that point, like, I think you need to give up the notion that you're secure at any point of time, and not to have that become a source of fear, but let that drive you to be the best version of, like, to have your work be the best you can deliver, and be the best version of yourself. Like, it sounds a little corny, but like, really use that as a motivation. Like, don't get comfortable, don't relax. There's really none of that.
Did you, perhaps a little off topic from that, but just before I forget, because I didn't put it in my notes, you had a number of partners, like co-founders, more than 1.
Correct.
How did that work for you? Because a lot of the things that we talk about here, and frankly, a lot of my business from troubled businesses has been shareholder and partnership disputes. How did you guys, I'm not looking for specifics unless you have specifics you want to tell me, but how did you guys handle that? Or was it never an issue, or was it just so intense nobody had time to complain?
I think it was the last one. It was just so intense, and like nobody had time to complain. And it's also a group, and I take a lot of pride in this. It's also a group of non-complainers.
Right.
Which is a personality.
Yep.
a personality fit. You're not going to fit with anybody 100%. And that goes for like spouses and friends and everything else. But like that was like a non-negotiable for me. Like I just don't do well with complainers. Like you fix your stuff because you understand that everybody has a boatload of their stuff that they could very well complain about, but that's not productive.
Right. All right. Well, let's move on to some lessons that you learned.
Actually, that's
being
probably,
an entrepreneur.
That's probably like the first lesson. I mean, how do you deter, like you and I worked together for almost like 7.5 years is a long time for anyone to work together.
100%. Yeah.
And there's like, did we get along 100% of the time? You may have thought so because I don't complain, but, but
I did think so.
Yeah, well, we did, but it's like on the big things. Yeah. And at that point, you kind of have to prioritize. Like, we get along on 80%. Does the other 20 matter? Yeah, we can fix 15 of the 20. Cool. Does the other 5 matter? No. Like, you kind of start to manage your relationship. And I think that's, first of all, it's a sign of maturity on both our parts. And frankly, I've had great relationship with everyone I've ever worked with. So that's one. But understanding that
you're just saying that was you, not me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Taking all the blame.
Yeah.
You have like a strong internal dispute resolution process within yourself, and you pick your battles. But at the same time, you understand that someone is pulling just as hard as you are in their own vertical, and respect their work. And like, it's not their job to make you happy. It's their job to do the best, the absolute best to deliver in their vertical.
Yeah. Yeah. So the lesson there for an entrepreneur in picking a partner is to go beyond what I talk about, which is a functional fit for a period of time, as opposed to, wouldn't it be cool to share this risk together?
Yeah.
Right, but a functional fit. But you're going even beyond that into a personality, not a fit, but just an absolute, don't hook up with a whiner or a victim.
It's going to be so much harder. The entire process is so hard. You don't need anything making it harder. Like you need, and there has to be an understanding from all sides that it's just so difficult. You need to focus on success rather than making each other happy.
Yeah. All right. Entrepreneurial lessons, just business lessons in general, but things that you learned going through your intense process. And you've already talked on tenacity, which is one of the notes that you sent me. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you talked about it in one of the first, I don't think it was a Martinis with Scott episode. I think you and I were just talking about it. And you were talking about Jim Cramer, who if you had invested with Jim Cramer, you'd be like dead broke by now. 10 times over. No. But he says something about but he's had this long running show despite that on CNBC, which is, a reputable network. Depends on who you ask. But his whole thing of how do you deal with failure? And he's like, I just show up. I just keep showing up the next day.
He does a rant.
Well, I wanted to distill it, if that's the word of the day.
Yeah, I wish I could remember it off the top of my head because
it's on YouTube.
It is on YouTube. It was wonderful. Do you want some more water?
Mm-hmm.
Ash,
would you please?
mind? Thank you. Back to the martini days. We could have shaking martini shakers in the
back.
There's
no ice in that.
He had just been killed on the Jon Stewart on the Daily Show.
Thank you so much.
Back in the day, and people are asking him how he carried on in the face of that much failure, public humiliation, mm-hmm. and the message was he went home and he looked after his tomatoes, he said, because that's what his wife told him to do. And he got up at 4 a.m. and he
listened
went and
to his wife.
Out.
Yeah.
He went and worked out and carried on. And the best revenge is getting back to work. And that was. And I think to me, in the companies and problems that I own, I just need to sort of towards the end of the day, I need to start working on things that I like and not dealing with problems, and then just wake up the next morning and start working on the shit again. That's kind of, and I've changed that throughout my career, how I go about it, but that's sort of where I'm at right now. I pick and choose the times a day and for how long I want to bury myself in problems.
Mm-hmm. I think that at one point, and I want to talk more about SRI stuff, but just because you and I can kind of have a conversation about it, you would be like unavailable for certain blocks of time where you're like, I'm not dealing with whatever happened at XYZ ABC. Like there's like 7 companies at one point. And you were like, we're just not dealing with it right now. Like you're gonna have to wait till 2:00 for your essay of questions.
Yep.
And then we'll deal with it then. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess it's just like a mental health break. But then you come back stronger at 2:00 or 3:00, whatever it was.
I mean, I advise people, like clients of ours that we have had in the past. I've advised them before, like you know what they do better than anybody. They show up in the morning at 8 a.m. and they work till 8 p.m. and they do nothing but put out fires, and they stress about it all day long. They never improve their business. They're just responding. They're just putting out fires. And then they go home and they worry about it and they don't sleep. And then they do the same thing again the next day. And how productive are they for 12 hours running around trying to deal with fires? They're not. They're not. You could do the same amount of work in 2 hours or 3 hours and then just stop dealing with shit, supplier phone calls, bounce checks, not collecting your receivables, like whatever the problems are of the day, like demand letters, litigations, all of that stuff. You could just stop after a couple hours and go back to doing what you're good at in the business and start making money. And if you don't do that, you're never going to push the business forward and get out of the trouble. I mean, what was our pitch to, still is, to a troubled business owner is you go do what you're good at and make money. I'll deal with all this shit for you.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I think it goes deeper than that they actually deal with 12 hours of the same exact problems day in, day out. Because they don't actually solve them. They just kind of massage them. They remedy them in the moment. They NyQuil them. Yeah. And then they don't take any time. Because, like, I get it. You're in this vacuum. You're in this, like, hurricane of issues. It's so hard to come up with a lasting solution as opposed to just, like, sticking Band-Aids on everything for 12 hours a day. I get it. You do probably need someone external to come out and help you. It's really hard to find people who you trust. They're probably not going to do things the way you as an entrepreneur would have done them, which might be a good thing because nothing changes if nothing changes. And they will come in and actually make small but potentially meaningful changes in the way your business is run so that you have to set yourself up to be able to disconnect from, firefighter mode for 12 hours a day. And if you're in firefighter mode, you can't do that. Like, I think that's where our value was as a company to say, here, like, I will take on the firefighter mode and I will just work with me with the analogy. I will set up fire hydrants and fire alarms throughout the space that you're in. And when those things break, a small team will convene, solve it, and then disperse. And you won't smell any smoke.
And also I'll take your matches away.
Yeah. Yeah. And someone will have to give up their lighters.
Yeah.
But but that's exactly it. And I think of, we can't name the food processor, right?
No.
Okay, so the food processor was exactly that, right? There was one individual who was president, CEO, and then literally everything else.
Yes.
And that's really hard to be productive in when you're doing absolutely everything all the time. It goes back to the balance.
But a natural reaction to failed systems and everybody else not doing what they're supposed to be doing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? So it becomes the opposite of the teamwork required to turn things around, the opposite of empowering people required to turn things around. It's completely natural, but it's the exact opposite instinct that you need.
I think that you recognize it very well, and I think it was part of your newly found empathy at the time, as opposed to just telling people they're wrong and they're screwed up. Is that how many of the founders in the, say, the 8 years that you and I were working together how many of the president CEOs were also the founders, and this was potentially a family business that they had inherited, right? There was a little, or the business that had fed the family. So my concern with that is you have to also appreciate that if they hire someone to do some part of that business, it might as well be somebody that they have integrated into their family unit. Like there's a lot more risk there. And you're right. Like there has to be kind of a sober mind looking at it, and it's hard to be that person when there's just so much emotional attachment to, this is my business, you know, my father founded it, I've been doing this for 25 years, like it feeds my daughter, it you know, pays the alimony, like whatever it is. And it's hard to get past that emotional to actually get a true result and to gain someone's trust to say, I can come out and I can help you make this work better. Because there are some very bad advisors out there that I'm sure, like, you're not the first person to come in the door. They say, well, we've hired this person before, we've hired that one before, and they gave us a binder of the problems that we had, and we said, yes, we know what they are, can you execute? And they said, LOL, like, we don't do that. And they still charged a ridiculous fee. I remember someone had pitched me like a financial advisor guy, and you and I laughed about this too. And the team was one of the guys said, you know, and I've done, you know, you did turnaround work. I was part of the turnaround team at, I'm just gonna say Deloitte. And you and I, like, the running joke was Deloitte is famous for putting out these, like, feel free to cut this part out, non-answer reports that would just be like a description of what is going on in the company. It's like, well, everybody knew this. For some reason, it's like 100 pages. There's no viable solution. It's like, I get it. These people have, first of all, emotional investment in the business, and they have potentially already a track record of working with bad advisors who potentially, you know, didn't live up to expectations, or were intentionally bad because it's just kind of mediocrity is how they get by. But that's my point. Like, it's a hard situation.
The gap
to
there
fix.
is that everybody except for the owner, manager, CEO, president, everybody knows what's wrong with the business. Like, we don't need a report to tell us that.
Yeah.
Right. We don't need to pay a bunch of money for a consultant to stand with a stopwatch and do cycle times on the machine count or whatever. We don't need that.
Well, we got into cycle times real quick. So we're like half an hour, 45 minutes in.
And we know what the cure is. We just don't do it. Right? The company just doesn't do it. Which comes back to this idea of confirmation bias and not executing. And not showing up every day and focusing on systems over goals and just moving things forward. Asking somebody for a report to tell you what's wrong with your business is not only a waste of money almost all the time, but it does nothing for you because you're not going to execute anyways because you already know the answer.
But I think a lot of...
By the way, where did the consultant get the answer? He got it from asking you.
Yeah, and put it in a report. I think that the expectation with what a consultant can deliver and what they actually do is just such a... is so drastically different that and there's almost like no sophistication level on part of the owner of a smaller business, like a medium-sized business, that they don't know what to expect if they've never worked with a consultant 100%. Before.
Yeah. Okay. You want to talk about ideas don't win, which is really a good lead-in from the consultant idea. Discussion. Ideas don't win. This concept that building a business and being an entrepreneur is all about execution.
Yep. And I think one of those I followed. It's gonna be okay. I used to watch The Real Housewives of New York City a long time ago when it was still a good show. Now it's trash. Don't watch it. Well, good.
I'm
like
glad
when
I
you
missed
wanted
that one.
to. Yeah, it's. You missed out a lot. So one of the women on there, remember, she started her own like beverage company. And when you look at what she did like a low calorie, I don't drink, so this was like a huge, it was just interesting for me. She started like a low calorie, like margarita, like premixed drinks. I don't know, whatever. She sold liquor. But it was very well marketed, very nice little pivot on what the competition was, but it wasn't even that complicated. Like there was no special formula to it. It was just a very clean, presentable, easy to have on your counter brand, and it was beautifully packaged. And she kind of cracked a very simple formula, and she recognized it was a niche market, like the alcoholic beverage market is huge, and she executed it like exceptionally. From soup to nuts. And I thought it was really interesting, especially in the beverage space, because it's so, and this is different from what I did. It's kind of different from what you and I have ever done, I think. But it comes down to like brand, right? Like it doesn't have to be this complex idea, but I think a lot of ideas fail in execution because people think that having this amazing idea, it's going to sell billions of dollars worth of product.
So, sorry, this was a real life thing. It wasn't Housewives of...
Yeah, sorry, it's a reality show, so it's all real life.
Okay.
Is what maybe like a drum roll after that comment would have been good.
No. That was having never seen the show. I didn't know it was a reality show. And so
Real Housewives.
There's actually a reason I'm asking you this is the did this person have an influencer on board for brand recognition? Because I was pitched a deal before influencers existed.
Oh yeah.
I was pitched a deal the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, on a beverage deal, and I won't give any details about it, but they have on board a former, I don't know if you're once an A-list celebrity, always an A-list celebrity.
Yeah.
I don't know, someone who was
like Liz Taylor.
Serious, somebody like that, but more from the 90s, to be the spokesperson for this and to be involved in the company. And I think the upfront was like $2 million and then $1 million a year. Plus some upside. Like
Back in the 90s, I was on a very famous TV show. Yeah.
It was a lot for a startup company.
And that's, well, like, if it's beverages, right, the margin is so massive, then, like, everything goes, like, gross margin is so massive, everything goes into marketing. It's like cosmetics. Remember you and I were joking about cosmetics?
It's true you need to sell a $1.1 million to get the $1 million to pay this person. But still, high risk. You got to pay them up front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rough. Sorry, back to the idea situation. I think that execution is paramount. Like it's paralyzing how many industries, like high value industries, are so far behind technologically for one, where minor tweaks could make such a substantial difference if only they were executed well. Yeah. Like you don't have to change the world. You know, you don't have to like invent something colossal to make a difference in almost any industry. I remember, back to Elon Musk. Do you remember how he did the launch? And you joked about it. What were the names of the astronauts? He did the SpaceX launch, and he did it for half the price of what NASA does.
Yes.
And
or way less than that even.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've actually had a relative work at NASA, and she's very open about it. Like they're brilliant people, but they're just kind of like stuck in their own ways.
Bureaucratic.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Elon said, "Well, all I did was make like some component recyclable." He's like, it wasn't like, you know, I didn't invent the spaceship. I just, you know, we noticed that this part, like you burn it up and you have to make another one. Like, can't you just capture it? And they were like, oh, okay. So it's one of those things. Like, I think like minor tweaks, if you can identify them, and that's just the understanding of an industry. If you can identify them, and you do a proper analysis on them, and you can find an inexpensive, easy to implement, incremental change solution, you can first of all get buy-in from people that this can be implemented, and it's a bought not sold situation, right? It immediately saves me a little bit of money or a little bit of time, or, you know, results in a better outcome. And you say, okay, cool, I have this minor incremental change. And then you kind of gain their trust. You say, okay, I have another minor incremental change. And then you go from there, which and I think that's actually how you approach turnarounds. Like, you don't come in and say, I'm going to fire everybody, I'm going to burn the house down. You start with incremental change, which it could be a decent idea, executed exceptionally, and you go from there. Better yet, like the best ideas, the most innovative, disruptive, you know, those tired words are actually the hardest to execute. And you can turn people away so quickly. Like, I go back to Theranos with Elizabeth Holmes. And
your favorite story?
My favorite story. That's why I'm wearing the red turtleneck, to not look like her. No. I've spoken to people about certain technologies when it comes to blood testing. And like, she actually fundamentally, like, if you go real far back, she's not fundamentally far off. Like, a one drop of blood is actually useful for a screen, like they do it in neonatal, right?
Right.
Their babies in Canada have their heel pricked, like 5 or 6 drops of blood, and it gets sent over on this piece of paper and it gets tested. And we trust that science to say, oh, there's a screen where it says, oh, there's some little abnormality. Let's look deeper into it. We'll draw a full vial of blood and we'll test it. She went with this idea so far and created this hoopla around it that I think she's actually undermined the technology that exists and is reliable around single drop blood testing, with the understanding that it is completely imperfect. And she was selling that this was going to be changing the world and you can diagnose cancer. Like, I spoken to a friend who was a doctor and said, well, can you tell me from a drop of anything if it's sweet or sour? Yes, right? Can you tell me every ingredient in it? No. And that's effectively what she did. Can we say something that's sweet or sour? And that's exactly it. So my point is, on the ideas, like, I think small incremental changes are more beneficial in any business if you stack them up rather than one giant swoop that stresses everyone out.
And so as a budding entrepreneur, you don't need to sit around and wait for the world-beating, disrupting idea.
You don't.
Because it's not really about that. You need to have something you're I almost said passionate. Oof. You need something that fits your purpose, and you need to execute.
Like, think about Amazon. Think about Amazon, like the house that Amazon built, right?
Yes.
Like, let's start with that. Do you need to touch a book in order to buy it? No, that was his initial idea. Why would you invest in expensive real estate with a really nice coffee shop and lighting and air conditioning? People walking around and saying, "Can I help you?" Like, no, it's an alphabetical order. If you can read, you can navigate the store. Yeah. Why don't we just do, like, it's a simple incremental change that he noticed that you don't need to try on a book.
Right.
Why don't I just make it mail order?
And as it so often these things are, it's about reducing the friction for the consumer. Mm-hmm. Simple as that. All right. We talked about work-life balance. Mm-hmm. And as my father would say, balance is bullshit. You're really not, there is no such thing as balance. There's only a choice. I'm going to focus on this and I'm going to focus on that. You were in the unique situation where you had a very young family when you started down this venture. And so that, because you're not one that likes to
take maternity
spread
leave.
Spread out your obligations. You just like to pile them one on top of each other. Mm-hmm. And so what did you learn from that experience?
So Mr. Sinclair Sr. was right. I don't think balance is a thing. And in fact, I think that it needs to be abandoned because if anything, it piles on the stress of, I must maintain a balance. And I remember, can we talk about the sink company in Coldwater, Ontario?
No.
Oh, really?
Because we could because I own it, but I know what you're going to say, so you shouldn't.
Is it about the Go Bus? No. So okay. So it's not an insult.
Okay.
But and it's not the only one.
Just let me apologize to my staff in advance. Go.
No. So I've encountered entrepreneurs, like people that, you sent me to Ottawa, you sent me to Coldwater, basically just cold parts of Ontario you didn't want to go to in January. But I think the reality is I've met so many entrepreneurs who will say stuff like, okay, we're going to finish up and I'm going to make it to my son's hockey game. And it's like, the building's on fire. You kind of have to, it's crazy that you put so much stress into the 8 hours of your day just to get out by 5 so you can make it to the rink by 6. You got nothing done in those 8 hours because of the pressure of trying to make it out at 5. Like, you're just going to have to give something up. Like, something will have to give. And it's either going to be your health. Like, that's just the reality. That's the other thing that's kind of in balance. You just have to get, like, people ask me, like, how did you manage it? And I was like, neglect. Like, that's just the reality, right? You kind of,
yes.
And I say it half jokingly, but you need to, having an understanding partner is important. Being a good communicator to your partner is important, like having their buy-in, just like you would have buy-in with any turnaround. A family and a relationship is really not that different from running a company. Like, whenever you come on as a president or CEO, like, you have buy-in into your leadership. Or one of your goals is to attain buy-in into your leadership from upper management.
Yep.
Otherwise, how are you going to execute?
Right. Exactly. Okay. I'm just going to jump ahead here because we're 50 odd minutes into this thing, you and I, through our careers, have always focused on two financial tools, financial models that I talk about on the Winning Momentum podcast. If anybody wants to learn about spreadsheeting, and you used to love those things.
I still do.
One of them is what we called a monthly rolling financial projection. So this would basically be the financial statements of a business, and you'd project out 3-5 years, month by month, and it would be driven by assumptions. And the reason I talk about that on this podcast is because that's how you establish your key performance indicators, those 3 to 5 assumptions which drive the whole business. There could be 100 assumptions, but only 3 of them really matter, economically speaking, right? And the other is a 13-week cash flow. Week by week, this is what I intend to bring in and I intend to spend. And as you know, the value of a financial model isn't really the output.
As you know, dear listener.
Yes. Isn't really the output, but rather the thinking process to go into it, right? And so when you get out of the turnaround world, when you get into the entrepreneurial space, did you continue on with that habit?
So I think one of the important things to note on that is that there's a third application for both those models, and that's to communicate to your partners. Absolutely. Or anybody who's, it doesn't live in finance.
It's a sales tool.
Yeah, it doesn't live in finance. Like, that's a really important element, that it's not driven by finance. It's compiled by finance, but it needs buy-in. Otherwise, you're just living in like a CFO dictatorship, right?
Right.
Like, I think companies that don't have those, especially mature companies that don't have those, also have this overarching symptom of poor communication.
Yes.
Nobody really knows what's going on. No one understands the bigger picture. No one understands their place in it, which frankly also impacts morale.
Yep.
And I'm not saying everybody that works for you has to, have input, but everyone senior enough does. And it doesn't give them a sufficient comfort to do things properly.
I think that when the shit hits the fan,
proverbial, sometimes literal.
Yeah, depends on the industry. I think it's natural for a leader. It's an instinct for the leader just to get tired of hearing same questions over and over again. And so they retreat a little bit, and it does exactly what you just said. And this summer, 2022, we had significant supply chain issues at some of our companies, and we're just getting out of that. There's a big bright light at the end of the tunnel. But I think I know for a fact that I've done that. I've done that myself, and I know better, right?
Yeah.
It's just a natural instinct, and then I get text messages, culture is gone, morale's gone to crap.
Yeah.
Which is 100% on me, just not showing up. Right.
Goes back to tenacity.
And dealing with, I'm being tenacious. Like I'm dealing with my problems, but I'm not bringing the team along.
Fair.
For the journey, you know what I mean? And I ought to be doing that. I think it's a natural thing. You raise culture. What was your experience with culture and turnarounds versus culture and entrepreneurs?
It's just the hardest thing to change. It's the hardest thing to establish, especially if your focus is on growth. It should be a priority as much as you can. I think it's going to be even harder to implement because of this whole kind of Zoom system, Zoom Teams environment that some people still are in. I think it's actually going to be harder for startups to kind of nourish that. Some of them say it's easier because you can go global, but who knows?
And what was your experience with troubled companies and their culture? Like, what would you observe walking into a business, one of my businesses, that I wouldn't necessarily observe culture-wise?
I think it's harder to do in a mature company because it's just been stale for so long. Whereas I think it's easier to create from scratch, relatively speaking. But I think one thing that we would observe is, to answer that question directly, is loss of purpose. I think you've said it a number of times that purpose is the source of happiness.
Yep.
And really the driver of all things. It's the loss of purpose, that people don't know why they're here yet again today, aside from getting a paycheck.
Right. Right. When you at Switch, did you have a a large Zoom component of your executive team?
Massive.
And you combine that, you had laborers as well, people that were out in the community.
In all seriousness, it's not like I can't talk about Switch. It's just I don't remember. So much happened, and it had actually been an established business before, but in a different like scale. It's hard. I think it was a very unique situation that you almost can't learn specifically about culture, that you can learn from and apply to a different, to more traditional business in a traditional environment.
Well, we have manufacturing companies, and we ask people to show up and work in manufacturing by the hour.
Yeah.
Some not so expensive and some well paid, and hundreds of people. And then we go to hire executives for the front office, and they ask if they could work virtually.
Ooh.
Right? Like, I expect you to show up and do work, but I'll just stay home on Zoom. To which is just a hard no, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Ooh. So does everyone at an SRI-owned company show up in person?
100%. Yeah. Except for SRI proper, as you know, has always been virtual.
Yeah.
Right, the core constituency of that, because we're not supposed to be sitting in an office. We're supposed to be going to the things that we own, or to our clients, and so that's always been that way. We're getting to the top of the hour here. Mm-hmm. I ask everybody what their 3 strategies might be for changing momentum. This is a podcast about winning momentum, about turning things around when things aren't going the way you think they ought to be going. Could be in your life, couldn't be in your business. What does Olga do to kickstart things and get them moving in the right direction?
Have difficult conversations.
Okay.
The one you want to avoid, have it right away. And I say that as a parent. I say that as a partner, and anybody who's ever worked in a professional setting. Have the conversations you don't want to have. They're probably the most important ones. And the push away from wanting to have one is probably an indication that it's an important one to have. 2, I think people say, have a positive attitude, but like, the hell does that even mean? I would distill it down to, don't assume the worst. If someone slights you, they probably didn't intentionally mean to do it, right? So many things are done out of carelessness than maliciousness. Yeah. Malintent. Don't assume the worst. And it's kind of like this lens that you see the world through. If somebody didn't return your call, they might have forgotten. They might have gotten busy with someone else. It's not that they're trying to anxiously avoid you and, kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. It's really important. And the last one is kind of to work onto that quiet quitting. Like, nothing changes if nothing changes. And life is not like it's not an endless highway. And it will seep into, if you're not happy with what you have, if you find no purpose in it, address it or change it. Otherwise, it will impact every other capacity of your life. Everything you have around you is interdependent. And if you are willing to kind of sit around and just be upset and not do anything about it, well,
if you don't change.
If you don't change, nothing around you will.
Love it. On this positivity thing, I worked on that a lot in my own thought process.
For how long?
The last couple of years. No, I've been thinking about it with the content,
Okay.
What is the power of positivity you always hear about? Why is this so important? And what I've concluded is it's not important at all. What it is it's a mitigation against negativity. What you want to do is not be negative.
Yeah.
Because negativity, as you said, drives all problems. It drives fears and paralysis, and that leads to more trouble, which leads to more negativity, which leads to family life stress, health stress, just everything. And so waking up and trying to be positive is a way to not be negative. That's the importance of it, I believe. Yeah,
that's a good point. Just stay away from negative thought and just capture yourself and just say, otherwise, it's exactly that. If you think that every time someone does something you don't like, it's because they're out to get you, that's an issue. Like, once you hear someone else say it, it becomes problematic. But I think that's really important.
I have learned over the years that when you have that sort of relationship issue, it's rarely about you.
Very. It's people like it's kind of like, what do people think about me? Like, they don't think about
They're
you.
not.
They're not.
Exactly.
They're thinking about themselves. It's fine.
Exactly. Don't forget that. Anything else you wanted to bring up before we sign off here?
That's it. When are the new hats coming out?
When are the new hats?
Yeah, I still have the outdated Martinis with Scott hat.
Yeah, I haven't got rid of those hats yet. We'll need to talk to our coordinator over here about swag for this thing. Do you want people to check out any social media, or do you care? Or?
No, I don't do social media anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's it.
Pitch yours. Pitch yours. Like.
Well, everybody knows to come check out thescottsinclair.com, and that's where we subscribe and check out the things and join the list. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. It's great to do a show in person. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ash, for helping us set this up. And I will talk to all of you next week.
Your loving gave me such a thrill, but your loving don't